Hey, welcome to another episode of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is a specific character. I'm going to look at the Green Goblin, who is my all-time favorite Spider-Man villain. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video where I reviewed all my Venom action figures, and I didn't have as many as I had thought. I have a few more Green Goblin figures, as I've liked him longer. He's been around a lot longer. And so the first figure that I'm going to show you is actually as old as I am, and the newest figure I actually just bought a couple of hours ago. So I'm sure if you're even watching this, you're familiar with the Green Goblin. He first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 14 back in 1964, which was well before I was born in 1978. So I grew up first introduced to Green Goblin in the cartoon series. So there was like the 60s Spider-Man cartoon that was playing on reruns. And then in the early 80s, there was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And not to mention Spider-Man was in, I probably had some coloring books and, things like that kicking around the house. And so, yeah, Green Goblin was always my favorite character. And this is even before I was what I would consider a comic book fan. I just liked the character of the Green Goblin. And I really wanted a Green Goblin toy, but when I was young, there wasn't too many superhero figures to go around, believe it or not. And Green Goblin was especially hard to get. So I guess that's probably why I have a Green Goblin figure that dates back to the year I was born. It's probably one of the earliest toys that I have that I still held on to. And I started collecting comic books when I was 8 years old in 1986. And when I started buying Spider-Man comic books, I was pretty shocked to learn that my all-time favorite villain, the Green Goblin, had actually died in 1973. It's like 5 years before I was even born. This character had been killed off in the comic books. So there was some other guys that were using the Green Goblin identity, such as so Norman Osborn is the original Green Goblin. So his son Harry was the Green Goblin in some of the comic books I had read. But I always really liked the Norman version of Green Goblin. And it was kind of a bummer that I would never get to read a new story with him. And he stayed dead in comic books for 23 years, which is a very long time in comic books, because everybody dies in comic books, but everybody comes back. And it's generally, sometimes just a few months later. But yeah, 23 years he was dead. He came back the year I was graduating high school in 1996. They brought him back as the big villain to wrap up the infamous Clone Saga storyline. And so ever since 1996, Norman Osborn has been back in the Marvel Universe as the Green Goblin, as well as a couple other identities. So he's had lots of time to have lots of toys. I don't have even close to all of them, but I've got quite a few. So without further ado, let's take a look at all the Green Goblins in my collection. So my oldest Green Goblin figure is also my largest. This is a Green Goblin from 1978. And so you see, he wasn't exactly the funnest toy to play with. He's not articulated at all. And he's pretty beat up. Like I said, I've had this thing for as long as I can remember. So on the back there, he took a big old battery, and you see there, so this is from Remco in 78. So when he had his batteries in, he had two features. So this thing here on the side, you'll see there's like saw blades there, which I think were used to, supposed to cut through webbing. And so those two saw blades went back and forth. And also this Goblin, it looks it's the same shape as like his Goblin glider that he rides around on. But there's a little light bulb in there. And there used to be a wire on the back. And that plugged into there, a little hole on its side. And so all that did was it shone a little light with his little Goblin lantern. And that's all he did. His arms don't move, his legs don't move. Like, he's pretty stiff. This guy's head is actually busted off. I put it on there with some sticky tack to hold it on for this video, but it's been busted off for about as long as I can remember as well. It was never a super fun toy, but I just liked it anyway because it was the Green Goblin and I liked this character a whole lot. And I think it's a great sculpt, even going way back then when toys didn't necessarily have the greatest of sculpting a lot of times. But yeah, I really like this face on him. I like his kind of little goblin-y scale skin. Wrinkles on his boots. Yeah, he's just a really cool piece, and I wish if he was in better condition, he would probably make a good display piece even to this day. But since he's pretty busted up, he usually just sits in a bin. But anyway, that's my first Green Goblin figure, and he's still pretty cool. So this is a bit of a cheat, as this is not a Green Goblin figure. But as I mentioned in my intro, the Green Goblin had been dead for several years by the time I was a kid and buying toys. And even though there were other people that were the Green Goblin here and there, Marvel had really replaced the Green Goblin with a new character called the Hobgoblin. And so I really liked the Hobgoblin too. As you can see here, he's got his Goblin glider. Now this figure here, he's from the Secret Wars toy line, which was a fairly expansive Marvel toy line that came out in the 80s, but not nearly expansive enough when you consider how big the Marvel Universe is. Yeah, these things here, there was, I don't know, maybe 30 figures in the whole line. And what year was this thing? 1984. So, as I mentioned again in the start, I didn't start collecting comic books until 86. So it wasn't until really after that point in time when I really started to get to know all the B-list, C-list characters that I really wanted to get some superhero toys, but there were none because this line had already fizzled out by that point in time. I can't even remember where I'd got this Hobgoblin. I know I didn't get it in 84. I had acquired it sometime afterwards. But yeah, so other than that big old stiff Green Goblin that didn't move at all, this was my first Goblin figure, and I liked it a lot. I still think it's a great sculpt on that face. And yeah, so that's my first Hobgoblin. And I believe, I'm pretty certain, this is the first ever Hobgoblin figure that was ever produced. And my next figure is another Hobgoblin. So this set of figures came out in 1990, and it was a pretty short-lived line, but I remember me and my brother Doug, we were so excited when these came out because we'd been super into Marvel Comics for like about 4 years at this point, and we had like no toys. We used to make like paper dolls of all the characters just so we had something to play with. And then one day we went into our local comic shop, which was called the Cardboard Jungle, and they had a box of these things on the counter. And so it was a row of about 5 Hobgoblins and 5 Spider-Mans and 5 Hulks, and they don't move at all. They're almost like, like Smurfs or whatever, just solid hunks of plastic. And as you can see, the sculpting on that face, it's nowhere near as good a quality as the last Hobgoblin figure I showed you. But nonetheless, it was finally new Marvel toys that were right in front of us and available to buy, and there were several waves of them. So after that initial wave, the Cardboard Jungle kept getting new assortments. So we probably got about 20 of these things in total. And it was kind of cool to get some contemporary versions of some of these characters. Like, for example, Vision, who was normally red and green. In the comic books at the time, he was all white. And my figure from this series was all white of the Vision. So again, it was cool to just get toys that were current. And yeah, even though this thing is pretty bad looking, we really played the hell out of these things. So yeah, that was my third Goblin figure. So 4 years after that crappy little Hobgoblin figure, I finally had a new Goblin figure, and finally it was the Green Goblin. So this 1994 figure is from the 1990 Spider-Man animated series. And that was a great cartoon, and I still love the figures from that line. This is my favorite Green Goblin figure that I have. So these things are about, almost about 5 inches tall, I guess. They're compatible with the X-Men animated line. But the sculpting on this guy is just great. I love his slouchy boots. You can see the scales in his legs. He's got his little pointy finger because sometimes he would shoot electricity from his finger. He's got his pouch of batarangs and pumpkin bombs and all that other stuff he threw. And I love this face sculpt. I wish the eyes weren't painted kind of wonky. He looks like he's looking in 2 different directions. But this is the head. This is how I picture the Green Goblin looking. Like you can see, it's pretty close to that head from the 1978 figure. Just his big ears, the kind of slouchy hat, This is how I remember Green Goblin looking. This is how he looked in the 90s cartoon, and I thought it was perfect. I just love this figure. You can see he's pretty well articulated. The knees and the elbows and the shoulders, spinny head. And he came with a bat glider as well, which is a must. And you can see here it had some missile launching action. So yeah, overall this was a fantastic Green Goblin figure. In the same Spider-Man animated line as that last Green Goblin, there was also a Hobgoblin, as both characters were featured in the cartoon. So see here, this guy's got a pretty good sculpt too, but I still don't think he's anywhere as good as that Secret Wars Hobgoblin figure. Like this guy, he's more articulated, whereas the 80s figure didn't bend at the knees or elbows. So this guy's got all that articulation. He's got a removable cape. I believe the Secret Wars figure actually had a cape as well, but I just don't have it because I think I got him secondhand. So yeah, the cape is removable. And yeah, this is a pretty cool figure too. And so there you go. There's Hobgoblin from the 90s. And the next Goblin figure I have didn't come out until about 10 years later. This is Green Goblin from 2003. And he's essentially still from that same Spider-Man animated line. Even though the cartoon didn't actually run that long, the toy line did. So this one here, though, it's actually based on specific comic book art. So you see he's got his glider here, which is pretty cool. And his feet just lock into place there. I'll get him out of there for a second. So this figure is based specifically on one of my favorite comic book artists. This is Humberto Ramos. And he's not credited on the package anywhere with inspiring this figure, but you can clearly tell. Because it was a storyline that he had drawn where he had kind of... the Lord of the Rings movies had come out, and they were pretty popular at the time. And I don't know, maybe that look of the green and purple little onesie was just not very believable as a tough villain anymore. Because this is the point in time, since that last figure I showed you, the Green Goblin had actually returned in the comic books. And so after his initial return, his second big battle with Spider-Man was drawn by Humberto Ramos, and they had changed his look to this. So you can see it's kind of inspired to look like one of the orcs from Lord of the Rings. So yeah, he had much more kind of a chainmail outfit, no longer the scaly legs and arms that made it look like he was bare-skinned. And the way his hat hangs, it's all stitched together. Big long hat in the back there. Multiple satchels for his weapons. The boots kind of look all stitched together. Anyway, he's got lots of articulation. And yeah, I think he looks great. Now, I don't think he looks as good as he did in the comic books. Like when Humberto first drew him like this, I thought he looked amazing. I thought it was a really cool modernization of Green Goblin. And I don't know, maybe this is actually what it looked like, but the way it was drawn, and colored in the comic books, it didn't look quite so monotoned. I find this one's a little boring with that same green body all throughout. I feel maybe if some more of these parts were black or purple or something, it would look a little better. But either way, Marvel is not typically known for doing artist-specific figures. And so, yeah, this is a rarity, and I'm glad it came out because I think it's a really cool figure. And also from 2003 is this Green Goblin Mini-Mate. So these are like little Lego figures. And so his little hat comes off. It's kind of funny that his ears come off attached to it. So yeah, they made a whole bunch of these little things. It wasn't really my thing, but just because Green Goblin is my favorite, I picked this. There was a 2-pack, I believe, with him and Spider-Man. So yeah, there is a little brick version of the Green Goblin. And next up is this figure from Marvel Select. Now this is a really cool looking figure. Now this, he's got that classic design that I said I like so much. So this is back to the, it looks like he's a bare skin goblin with green arms, green legs, and he's just wearing a little purple onesie. So as silly as it might be, it just really works in this classic design. And this toy specifically is based off of a famous Spider-Man cover when the Green Goblin is dragging Peter Parker by a rope like that. So this Peter Parker, it's not articulated at all. This is really just an accessory to the main figure. He's got this cool rope. So yeah, this is potentially could be my favorite Green Goblin figure. He's got that great maniacal look on his face. He's got some articulation there in the arms. He's got a satchel that's removable. But the problem with this figure, and which keeps it from becoming even close to my favorite, is... So this all comes apart here. So the glider comes off the stand, which is great. So you can fly Goblin around like that. You take the rope out of his hand. He comes off of his glider. And there he is. So you can see he moves. He moves at the shoulder. He's even got like good ball joints there, so lots of movement. Swivels at the wrist, swivels at the joint for the glove. So lots of movement there. His head moves. He's got a waist swivel. He moves there. The top of the leg. Ankles articulated, even rocker ankles, which is not something you come across all that often, so that's really nice. And then, yeah, for whatever friggin' reason, they didn't give him any knee articulation. So he's permanently stuck in the squatting position, which is pretty useless as a figure. You can't play with him like this. So I don't know why they did that. It really bothers me. Like, he makes a great display piece if you keep him there on the glider, on the stand, holding Peter. But yeah, if I wanted to take this figure down and play with him, make him fight another figure, it's just absolutely ridiculous that his knees don't bend. Because it seems like it would have been a relatively easy thing to do. But cool looking figure, just not that successful as far as articulation goes. So here's another weird one. And I'm not sure if I'm presenting these in exactly the right order that they came out, but it's pretty close. So yeah, this one might have come out before the Select or after the Select. I don't remember the name of this line, but it was these big, bulky, clunky children's figures. And let's see, we might have the date on the back there. 2005. So I actually had a bunch of these figures. They were really silly. I had a construction worker Hulk, and I think a police officer Spider-Man. And yeah, they were cute. And I got rid of most of them, but I held on to the Goblin just because, he's one of my all-time favorite characters. Although, to be honest with you, this is probably the least coolest of all these, because the Spider-Man and the police officer outfit was really cute. This one here, though, I find the face is a little too childish. Like, he actually looks like a little boy dressed as the Green Goblin, which kind of creeps me out a little bit. I wouldn't mind if he had like a more standard Green Goblin face, but just had this cute kind of super deformed body. But yeah, as it is, the face I don't really like on this, but otherwise the sculpting's pretty nice. And yeah, I'd actually forgotten about that. But on his back there, that peg, you can strap his glider on there. And there you go. Now he's got a little, you can go hang gliding. So yeah, that's this cutesy little version of the Green Goblin. And look at that. That's the cover I was telling you about. So this figure here is kind of an 8-inch doll in the style of the old Mego dolls. So this was kind of a short-lived line called Famous Covers. And it's got a nice cover there. And, famous cover, so it shows probably the most famous of the Green Goblin covers. There's a little kind of bio of him inside there. There's the figure. And on the back, there's the ad, so you can order your Aunt May action figure. Anyway, let's pop this guy open and we'll take a closer look at him. Alright, so there's the Famous Covers Green Goblin outside of the packaging. I'm having trouble getting him to stand on his glider. These straps on there, I feel used to have a lot more elasticity to them and they would hold him in place. But now they feel really flimsy, and so it doesn't really help him stand at all. But anyway, this is a really cool figure. Like, even though he's, these little dolls with the cloth clothing are kind of goofy and kind of retro, but they're fun. So yeah, this guy's got, you see his green skin, but it's kind of like pajamas on him almost. His gloves, he's got these big ridiculous rubber gloves. The pumpkin is actually attached to this glove permanently. Here he's got a fisted hand. Let's see if we, take that off for a second. I'm a little worried if I take these gloves off, because I have a Daredevil in this line too, and last time I took him out, his cloth had all like deteriorated into nothing. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave his glove on there. But yeah, I assume you could take this guy's whole outfit off. I don't know if he's just like a naked green Ken doll underneath. I've never bothered to take it off there. But you can see it's Velcro along the back. He's got his little satchel as always. And yeah, just a great head sculpt. The thing that's kind of weird about it is I find this figure is very retro. It's very reminiscent of the old Mego doll, which I don't have, but that would have been probably the first Green Lantern figure ever, was this little 8-inch doll that came out in the 70s. But this head feels very contemporary. It's very stylized. It looks like almost anime. So I like it, but it's kind of a weird fit for this retro style body. So anyway, I like the hat, the way it hangs. I like his big ears. Yeah, so it's a pretty cool figure. There you go. Famous Covers Green Goblin. So next up, I have this 3 3/4 inch figure from the Marvel Universe line. Now technically this guy wasn't packaged under the Marvel Universe packaging. This was part of a Spider-Man toy line that was kind of a subset of the Marvel Universe. And this figure is probably from about 2009, 2010. So he's not a bad figure. He's got some nice detail. That kind of black wash over the purple brings out some of the detail. Again, he's got the satchel. And these figures here, very well articulated. You know, everything you'd expect to find. The wrists and the shoulders and the elbows and the neck. Nothing at the waist, which is kind of different. The knees. And of course he's got his little glider here. And yeah, I like this figure a lot, although the head, there's just something about the head that seems a little off to me. It's either not quite classic enough, kind of gross hair on it, not classic enough or contemporary enough. He seems to be kind of stuck between somewhere. And even the colors, like this is a very dark green for the Goblin. So it's a good figure, but yeah, I don't know. By this time of collecting, and Norman Osborn in the comic books had become such a menace, not just to Spider-Man, but to the whole Marvel Universe. He had really become kind of like the Lex Luthor of the Marvel Universe. To picture him in this outfit, it just seems a little too... He seems a little too scrawny. And I don't know if this outfit really worked for him anymore at that point in time. But yeah, not a bad figure. In the same Marvel Universe line, we got another version of the Hobgoblin. So again, this figure is adequate. He's got everything you'd expect to see in the Hobgoblin. He's got the glider, he's got his satchel, he's got kind of the chainmail arms, the cape and hood. But again, there's just something about this face that's not quite right to me. Like, it's pretty good. I just feel like maybe if his head was a little more sunk in and this hood came out over top of it, it just looks almost like it's one piece, like his head is growing out of the hood or something. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I don't love it. It's not bad, and for a figure this small, I feel it's adequate in that scale. It's a lot better than that little thing I had from 1990, but yeah, I still think they could have done better. Now, also in the 3 3/4 inch Marvel Universe line, we've got this figure here, and I'm sure you're thinking, well, that's not a Goblin, that's Iron Man. And you're right, it's not a Goblin, but it's not Iron Man either. This is actually Norman Osborn as the Iron Patriot. Now, if you know your comics, then you're probably familiar with this. But if you're not into comic books and maybe you just watch the Marvel movies, you might recognize the Iron Patriot from the third Iron Man movie. Because they obviously liked the idea of this kind of American flag armor, and they used it for, War Machine wore this armor. But in the comic books, it was actually Norman Osborn that wore this armor. He had kind of taken over S.H.I.E.L.D., and he got access to all of Tony Stark's armor, and so he started wearing this. And so yeah, it was kind of it lasted for, I think, maybe 2 years or so in the comic books, and it was kind of different, and I I knew he'd go back to being the Green Goblin eventually, as he would need to. But it's kind of a neat little blip on Norman Osborn's timeline that he was an Iron Man for a little while. Now, this Green Goblin figure is from 2014, and he is from a lineup that was, I think, called Marvel Mashups or Marvel Mashums or something along those lines. So you'll see here, he's kind of blocky looking, and he's got all these little plugs all over him. So the idea of this line is that you break them all apart and you can mix and match their parts. My nephews were really into these for a while, and they had a whole bunch of them. So you could put, you know, Spider-Man's arm and Hulk's leg and Green Goblin's body, and you could take things like this pumpkin bomb here. So these kind of plugs were all over the toy line. So you could take the pumpkin and plug it onto his knee if you want to. I don't know why you would necessarily. But yeah, it's not really my cup of tea. And again, I just bought this figure. It's the only one I had, just because it's the Green Goblin, and I kind of like to pick up, you know, Green Goblin figures when I have the opportunity. So there you go. He was something different, and yeah, it's actually not bad looking for what it is. So here's my next Green Goblin, and I know he looks pretty weird, but by the time this figure came out in, I don't know, say 5 years ago or so, I had moved on to collecting Marvel Legends, which is the super detailed 6-inch Marvel line from Hasbro. It had been around a lot longer than that, but they really kind of upped their game around that time. They started putting out really nice figures. And yeah, a Green Goblin figure is what I was really looking forward to. But the first Green Goblin they gave us was this guy, and this is Ultimate Green Goblin. So if you're not familiar with him, there was an alternate universe called the Ultimate Universe, and what it was is Marvel wanted to retell stories of some of their most famous characters like Spider-Man and the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, but free them from all the years and years and decades of continuity. So they started these books over from scratch, and the characters were all younger, and it gave writers and artists a chance to reimagine some of the characters. And this is what they thought they would have reimagined the Green Goblin to look like, which I thought was a terrible idea. You know, he looks like the Hulk with devil horns. It was pretty dumb. Now, this figure here was actually a Build-A-Figure. So you had to buy all the other figures in the wave, and one figure would come with his leg, one figure would come with his head, and you snapped them all together, and you got the complete Ultimate Green Goblin. Now, I don't remember exactly what 6 or 7 figures were required to complete Ultimate Green Goblin, but I obviously didn't bother to buy all of them because I don't have either of his arms. Yeah, he should actually have just 2 green arms with claws. The arms he's got here, he's got a Thanos arm and a, I want to say, Mandroid arm, or I can't even remember where that arm comes from. But those are just a couple other spare parts from some other unfinished Build-A-Figures that I have. I don't display him like this. Any Build-A-Figure that I don't have complete, I just throw them in a bucket of spare parts. But I snapped those arms on him for the purpose of this video. But I'm not a fan of Ultimate Green Goblin. I thought it was a bad redesign. And yeah, just a poor characterization. And yeah, this figure does a decent job. It looks like he did in the comic books. I just don't like it. Now, it was just about a year ago that we finally did get a classic Green Goblin in the Marvel Legends line. So this is one of the characters I was most excited about getting once I really started buying Marvel Legends. And this is a big disappointment for me. Again, it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly what I don't like about it. The main thing is the head. I don't like that head sculpt. Again, it looks like it's kind of a mishmash of, they tried to take some of the design from the Humberto Ramos with the, I don't know, hat sideburns or whatever. It looks kind of like the orc redesign. But then he's got so many of the classic elements. And that face, I think, is just too stylized. It looks a little crazy. I don't really think it looks like the Green Goblin. It looks more like maybe the Jackal or something. But, and the head, the green of it, it doesn't seem to match the green on the limbs. Yeah, I just was really disappointed with this figure because the Marvel Legends toys have been just amazing the last couple of years. And so then to finally get one of my favorite characters and have him be a disappointment was disappointing. So yeah, there you go. This is my most recent Green Goblin figure. We also got a Hobgoblin in the Marvel Legends right around the same time as the Green Goblin. And I have pretty much the same complaints. Like, this should be a good figure. Like, he's got all the classic elements you'd want to see in a Hobgoblin. He's got his kind of tattered look, which he sometimes has. So the body is fine, but it's just that head. That doesn't look like any Hobgoblin that I've ever read in the comic books. For one, his face should be yellower, and Hobgoblin, he had kind of a pretty human face, despite it being red eyes and yellow skin. And then for a while, he was actually possessed by a demon, and he had a really crazy face with exaggerated features. And again, this one I feel it doesn't go far enough one way or the other. It looks more like this is the possessed version, but it doesn't look like the possessed version did in the comic books. I just don't like it. Like, I want this body with this head. This is the head that should be on there. That's what Hobgoblin looks like. So this is just, again, disappointing. I hope that we get better versions of both of these guys sometime in the near future. Now this here is my latest Goblin figure. This is the Red Goblin. Now this is still Norman Osborn, the original Green Goblin, but this is his most recent identity, as he appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 800 just about sometime within the past year. So the premise was, since Green Goblin's return in 96, he's fought Spider-Man multiple times. He disappears for a while and he comes back. He's changed his look a couple times, like as the Iron Patriot. And yeah, I guess the writers are just struggling to try and find new things to do with him now. So most recently, Norman Osborn merged himself with the Carnage symbiote. So this is a combination of Green Goblin and Carnage, which is the Red Goblin. And his look is kind of silly. The premise is kind of silly. It's kind of overdone, just taking two characters, mashing them together. Carnage himself is already a ripoff of Venom. We have way too many symbiote characters running around. We have way too many goblins running around. And yet, for some reason, this just worked for me. I thought it was cool. Obviously, I wanted to go back to being the Green Goblin eventually, and I'm sure he will. But for just kind of a one-off story, or who knows, maybe he'll be back again as the Red Goblin. But I just thought this was pretty neat. I like him. I don't think this figure does a fantastic job of capturing the way he looked in the comic books, but he does a pretty good job. And if it looks kind of crazy, that's because it was a crazy redesign for the character. Now, it almost looks like his jaw should move there, but it doesn't. It's not articulated. But you can kind of move it a little bit because it's kind of rubbery, so you can make him talk, I guess. Now, what's interesting about this design is the head shape. So he's not wearing a hat. It kind of looks like the Green Goblin design they used for the Sam Raimi movies, when Willem Dafoe played him and he had this big, weird, cone-shaped helmet. And I know most people hated that look. I really didn't like that look. I've kind of grown to, like it a little bit more, as I've always loved those movies. It's just the Green Goblin costume. Since I'm such a big Green Goblin fan, I was very disappointed with how that costume design went. I used to have a Willem Dafoe Green Goblin figure that I got rid of. I kind of wish I had it back now, but anyway, I just thought it was interesting that they would go back to that design aesthetic for the Red Goblin. Otherwise you can see he's pretty standard Marvel Legends articulation, double jointed knees, the ankles, the waist, everywhere you'd expect. He does have this tail, which is kind of weird. I don't know why, because neither Green Goblin or Carnage ever had a tail, but whatever. And then he's got some of these little tendrils poking off of him. This one on the back is removable. The ones on the arms, I think, are permanently attached. He's got a pumpkin bomb that's even been venomized or carnageized, whatever you want to call that. And yeah, I think it's a pretty cool figure. And I've been eagerly anticipating getting this. This is one of those things that almost as soon as this character appeared in the comic book, within about a month they announced an action figure was coming out, which is odd. But I was looking forward to it because I enjoyed that storyline. And so here he is. And that is my rundown of Goblin figures. So there you go. That's my collection of Green Goblins, as well as some other Goblins. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this character-specific video, make sure you like the video and let me know in the comments if there's another character that you want me to take a look at. Depending on how many figures I have of that character, I'd be happy to do a video on somebody that you request. But yeah, anyway, just please subscribe to the channel, leave me a comment, and as always, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.